could just sit, I could just sit and wait for all your goodness, hope to feel your presence. And I could just stay, I could just stay right where I am and hope to feel you, hope to feel something again. I could hold on to who I am and never let you change me from the inside. I could be safer, I could be safe here in your arms and never leave home, never let these walls down. But you have called me higher, you have called me deeper, and I'll go where you will lead me, Lord. You have called me higher, you have called me deeper, and I'll go where you will lead me, Lord. Will you lead me, Lord? As we enter into our Lenten journey, so much of what the Gospels are trying to teach us is about moving out of ritual and into relationship with God. About prayer in particularly, Sister Jones Chittister writes, I grew up being told to pray, that there would be no rain for the picnic, or that my grandmother would not die from the cancer that was eating her up inside, or that I would walk again, or that the war would end, or that Russia would be converted, or that peace would come. And I prayed for all those things and was deeply disappointed when most of them did not happen. Prayer, they told me, was a conversation with God, but God, it seemed, seldom answered. What was the matter with me if God did not answer those prayers? Better yet, what was the matter with God, who could have answered, but did not? It took me years before I realized that actually the church had been teaching a far more profound theology of prayer than was ever talked about in the parish. Prayer, I was taught, had 4 purposes: adoration of a God whose cosmic control, it seemed, demanded it; contrition for my sins, however hard I tried to be perfect, I failed; supplication for favors that did not always come; and thanksgiving for gifts I got but did not recognize. There was nothing really wrong with such a schema, except that it was more of a regimen, a series of exercises, than a dialogue with God. It seemed to me, thanks to that explanation, that prayer was all about the worship of a remote God who crouched in the dark somewhere, waiting to catch us in the act of defiance that would forever cast us out of heaven. It was about learning to fear the loving God who had made us from dust and never really expected us to be perfect. It was about begging to be spared the very essential elements of life: failure, growth, and death. It was about being thankful that things hadn't been even worse than they were. The problem was that the basic teachings on prayer were definitely not about the development of a life lived in harmony, in relationship with the God of ongoing life. They were not about learning to live a spiritual life that would actually insulate us from putting our hearts on the things of this world, instead of on the God who gave us life and then helped us to live it well. Instead, it was about some kind of Santa Claus God, who, if we were good, whatever that meant, under stress, would save us from our vile selves and crown our lives with worthless baubles that, in the end, would all simply disappear. All that effort for nothing, I sighed. One thing for sure, this kind of prayer was not about finding the God who loves us uniquely and wholly and carries us through the dark places of spiritual growth and companions us through this life to the next. But then I began to read the mystics and discovered the other teachings of the church on the development of the spiritual life. Here, the great spiritual masters of life taught that our ascent to God went through 3 stages: First, it required us on the purgative level of the spiritual life to let go of our immersion in the material dimensions of life so that we could come to the fullness of our being. At the second level of prayer, the illuminative, we learned that we would find ourselves absorbed in the contemplative awareness of God alive within us and around us. Then finally, after years of growing beyond things and into God, here and now, at the third stage of spiritual life, we would finally come to the unitive level of our spiritual search and its melting of the human heart into the mind of God. That kind of prayer life, I understood, was not an exercise. It was another entire way of life that saw God in the here and now. So without doubt, someday, in the there and then, whatever, whenever that next stage might be. Today, let's reflect and ask ourselves, is our prayer life just ritual, or is it bringing us closer and closer into relationship with God? I will be awesome. I will be